I don't know exactly when it was, but sometime after that, I went into my bureau chief and I said, you know, Eisenhower seemed to be saying something important, but nobody seems to have paid much attention to it. I would like to take some time off and try to figure out what the hell he was talking about. To the credit of my bureau chief, he said, go ahead. And as a result, sometime in 1962, I wrote a series of articles for the Chicago Daily News and its syndicate on the military-industrial complex, at least as I understood it at that time. The result of those stories was that I won a scholarship, a year-long fellowship at Harvard to pursue this same subject. So I've been interested in this subject for more than 50 years. Here's what Eisenhower said. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. We annually spend on military security more than the net income of all United States corporations. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved, and so is the very structure of our society. But Eisenhower never said what we should do about it. And essentially, nobody listened. But I kept thinking about it for all these years. And I came to the conclusion, or I should say I have come to the conclusion, that Eisenhower at best was half right, and possibly only 2/5 right. Because I believe there is a complex of political and economic forces. And it's not just a military-industrial complex. It's a military-industrial congressional academic complex. Maybe 4 legs to the stool, or there may be 5. A military-industrial congressional academic intelligence complex. Now, you all know what happened to this country after World War II. America inherited a broken Europe, a broken Far East, and within a few years perceived itself as in competition with the Soviet Union for essentially control of the world. And we became leaders in this confrontation. And in the course of that, we built up a huge nuclear arsenal, more than 10,000 nuclear weapons, many of which we still have, a worldwide system of bases, a huge armaments industry, and today the United States dominates the world. We have forces on every continent except Antarctica. We have aircraft carrier battle groups in all of the world's oceans. And since 1950, we've had troops in at least 54 countries. And in a typical year, we've had troops in at least 20 in a typical year. We spend more on defense right now, in all probability, than all of the other countries of the world. No other country has ever dominated the world with its military power the way the United States does today. But please keep in mind that this vast complex was built up during the Cold War, and we all know the reasons for it. But the Cold War has been over. It's been over since 1991, 19 years. Yet today, defense spending is at an all-time high, even under President Obama. Since 2001, when George W. Bush became president, 10 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the defense budget has increased an average of 7% a year, and the total rise in this period has been about 38%. Now, I'm aware that this is pretty serious stuff. So I want to start by telling you a story about who runs America. And it involves how we got into one of our wars that we have today, the war in Iraq. And it involves why we're still there 7 years later, when the reasons that were given for our going into the war long since have disappeared, weapons of mass destruction. It's a story you will not read in your newspaper, and it's a story you will not hear on your television. But it is a story about how America runs. I'm going to start with the least understood aspect of what I call the military-industrial congressional academic complex, and that is the academic complex. These are the right-wing, hired ideological guns hired by big defense contractors and corporations to develop intellectual arguments for defense spending and for war. They dominate the dialogue in Washington, and essentially they do it through what are known as think tanks. The big think tanks are the American Enterprise Institute, that's the big one, the biggest, the Heritage Foundation, and the Cato Institute. The Cato Institute is the only one which has ever identified the source of its support. When it did, it listed more than 100 corporations, almost all of them involved in defense industries or the oil industry. Thomas Franks, the best-selling author of the book, What's the Matter with Kansas, wrote this: during the last 3 decades, the cottage industry of conservative institutes and foundations has grown into a powerful quasi-academy with 7-figure budgets and phalanxes of senior fellows and distinguished chairs. There are, by his estimate, dozens, if not hundreds, of these think tanks in Washington, almost all of them conservative. Not all, but almost all. He described the American Enterprise Institute as the reliable voice of corporate money. And he pointed out that it was the deep thinkers of the American Enterprise Institute who dreamed up the war in Iraq. Now, you might believe that's an outrageous statement, but there is a history.